And so I decided I was going to understand how all the money worked in a neighborhood. And what I didn't understand till I went to Wall Street is you literally have to know how all the money on the planet works to understand how the money in a U.S. neighborhood works. Because it's organized, it's very centralized, and it's organized so that, so if you and I go to the White House, it'll say, here's how all the money works in housing, here's how all the money works in military. But it doesn't say, here's how the money works, in West Philadelphia. So you can't, now with relational databases, you could, and I've worked on that. But anyway, so I went to Wall Street because I wanted to learn how all the money, the planet works. And I went from sort of department to department to department, learning all the different markets. And then I figured out, it's all being rigged from Washington. It's the Treasury and the Fed. So I got to go to Washington. So I went to Washington. I was a partner at a firm called Dillon Read. And in fact, I have an online book called Dillon Read and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits about it's a case study in the intersection between organized crime and Wall Street and Washington. Anyway, so I went to Washington in the first Bush administration to be Assistant Secretary of Housing. And it's the Federal Housing Commissioner. And that's the person who oversees all the mortgage markets, both the credit, most of the credit, and then the rules and regulation. So, and I ran smack into all the mortgage corruption because a lot of the black budget is financed with mortgage fraud. And anyway, so I left, but I discovered the internet when I was in the administration. And so I created an investment bank that could use software tools basically to get all the information about how the money works and make it accessible to neighborhoods. So anyway, but my company, I started a company called Hamilton Securities Group. It was very successful. And we got hired on competitive bid by the Clinton administration. So I worked in the Bush administration, but we got hired by the Clinton administration to be financial advisor for the FHA. And we led $10 billion of mortgage auctions trying to stop the mortgage fraud. Which was, they had other ideas. They wanted to take the mortgage fraud the other way so we could have the financial crisis. Anyway, so I ended up in 11 years of litigation with the federal government, with the Department of Justice. Have you ever seen the movie Enemy of the State? With Will Smith?
It's been a long time, yeah.
I played Will Smith in real life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I played Will Smith in real life. So we had 18 audits and investigations, 12 tracks of litigation, physical harassment, a smear campaign. It was right out of the movies. And of course, so Will Smith is a successful attorney. And in fact, his office in the movie is right next to where my office was, our company office was in Washington. And, everything's crazy and the world makes sense until he finds Gene Hackman, who's a former NSA employee, who explains how covert operations work. And in fact, now if you come to the Solari Report, we have a whole 12-part series called Deep State Tactics. So if you can't find Gene, you can listen to Deep State Tactics and understand how it all works. Anyway, but I got a real crash course. I'll never forget. First time I saw Enemy of the State, I'm like up in the front row. And I'm like, oh, it's my training movie.
Wow.
Right.
That's amazing. So when you talk about the mortgage fraud, what specifically do you mean, and how does that work?
So financial fraud and mortgage fraud is like the joy of cooking. There are thousands of recipes, right? But if you want to know the most prominent, likely famous recipe for mortgage fraud and HUD housing, all you have to do is look up the Tony Soprano TV show did a series of 4 parts on HUD fraud by Tony Soprano.
Really?
Yes. And the basic, and it's interesting because one of the things that got me interested in money is it was this fraud that destroyed the value of homes in my neighborhood when I was a little girl. We had 4 boarded up, foreclosed properties catty corner to our block in West Philadelphia, and it had a huge sign, and it said, by order of the Assistant Secretary of Housing, Federal Housing Commissioner. And I used to think, who is that asshole? And so when I was sworn in, they said, by order of the president, you are now the Assistant Secretary of Housing. I thought, I'm the, And I went downstairs and I said, how many boarded up homes? How many foreclosed properties do we have in the foreclosed industry? My deputy said 50,000. I said, well, that's going to change. And that was part of the problem. But okay, so let's look at the basic fraud.
Okay.
So there's a home in the foreclosed property inventory of the Federal Housing Administration. They had financed a mortgage. They put an insurance policy on the mortgage, so they take the credit risk. It defaults. They pay off the mortgage holder, and then take back the property. So the property's sitting there in inventory. Okay, so let's say the property's worth $100,000.
So like when you find a house for sale on HUD auction, that's the situation.
Yes, probably.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Probably. Okay, so let's say the house is worth $100,000. Okay, you sell the house to someone, or you who's going to do sort of a quickie fix up. Okay, and you let them turn around and sell it at you put a mortgage. Let's say it's worth $150 now. They've fixed it up. Mm-hmm. You put a mortgage on it for $250, a lot more than it's worth.
Right.
Okay. They sell it to a not-for-profit who immediately defaults. Right. You pay off the $250 mortgage and take the property back, and you keep doing it again and again and again, mm-hmm. and generating lots of money out the back door. So when I became FHA commissioner, we would find one property in Chicago which had financed and defaulted 5 times in 1 year.
Wow.
I know. You can imagine that. Anyway, but here's how I can make even more money.
I had a friend who did this. Not a friend. He was a guy who came in. He was one of my first guests on the podcast, and he was buying up houses in Tampa, and he was taking them and getting his friend to go do appraisals on them and like marking the appraisal up by like 5x, right. and then getting loans on it.
Right. That's sort of that's a variation. Now, here's how you really make a lot of money. When you issue the mortgage, you don't issue one mortgage, you issue 10 mortgages on that house, and you put them in a mortgage pool that's wrapped by Ginnie Mae so you can sell them in Dubai, and nobody knows the difference, right? Oh. Right. And as long as there's money, you can skim out the back door of the FHA fund, no problem.
Wow.
Right. And it's really funny. So I had warned people about this kind of fraud, both when I was assistant secretary and then when I was the lead financial advisor. But you know, you know what it's like when you fight these winds, and so I'm driving down the highway in Georgia, and my old roommate from college calls me and she says, "Fitz, have you seen the Soprano TV shows? They have the HUD frauds on the Soprano TV shows." And she said, "I guess you're telling the truth." And I said, wait a minute. So I was the former Assistant Secretary of Housing, and then I was the lead financial advisor for HUD. And I've told you about this for years. You don't believe me until it's on the Soprano TV show. And she said, that's right. So I said, that's why I say in America, fact is fiction and fiction is fact. If it's on the news, it's likely fiction. You know, if it's on the Soprano TV show, there's a...
Oh, yeah.
You know, you're getting your training film.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Well,
remember, during the financial crisis, within a very short period of time, there was more money shoveling out the door. I mean, the TARP IG said total money the taxpayers financed is $27 trillion. $8 trillion would have paid off all the single-family mortgages in the country, right? So the total bailout of the mortgage fraud was 3 times all existing mortgages in the country.
That's bananas.
So one of my favorite quotes, I was told by a former intelligence officer who was involved in the financial fraud that Oliver North had said that HUD was the candy store of covert revenues. And based on what I cleaned up and what I dealt with, I'm absolutely convinced
HUD was the candy store of covert revenues. That is...
Well,
that's got a nice ring to it.
HUD's missing just from its financial statements $1 trillion from 1998 to 2015. So that's my whole thing about the missing money, which Catherine is that's one of those issues Catherine won't let go of and keeps banging. If you look at the federal budget last year, so the 2025 year, we had a military budget of $857 billion. Yeah. And Hegseth wants to take it to $1 trillion. He says it needs to be $1 trillion. The HHS budget is $1.8 trillion. And that's because we're all poisoning each other. American people are poisoned. They're chronically ill. And if you look at our healthcare system, it's almost double the cost of Switzerland's healthcare system. So we spend more per capita than just any country in the world by a lot. And so it's very expensive. And but So Mark Skidmore, who is the professor at Michigan State University, who's helped me a lot sort of document all the money missing from the federal government, he just finished a calculation. We just did a show with him on the Salary Report. If we cut disability, so the number of people in America who are disabled, back down to 2010 levels, you would drop that HHS budget by $500 billion.
Wow.
Right. So that's what it costs to poison your population. And that's why this battle around the HHS budget and policies is so fractious, including the fact that the government is legally liable, if the truth comes out, for poisoning Americans. Which means if you look at what Toby Rogers says, Toby Rogers is the guy who's really tried to cost out the price of autism. Mm-hmm. So I got onto all of the HHS issues because I was an investment advisor. And what I discovered was that healthcare fraud was the number one cause of family bankruptcy or loss of family wealth. And number two, in my experience, was financial fraud. So people were just losing their wealth because they were being lied to. They were being lied to by the healthcare system.
By hospitals?
Everybody.
Really? Like legitimate healthcare organizations? Okay.
Yes. And many of those legitimate organizations really didn't know. I mean, my father was a very successful surgeon. You know, I sort of grew up. Unfortunately, we'd say, "Daddy, what did you do today?" And then he'd really tell us.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. No, the dinner table at our house was very. We used to read his surgical books for fun.
What kind of surgeon?
He had, during the World War II, they had taken the University of Pennsylvania Hospital and literally picked up most of the people and the organizational structure and moved it under Stilwell to Burma. So he grew up in, or he did his internship and residency in China, Burma, doing trauma. He was a MASH unit, right? And when he came back, you know, because a lot of the big improvements they make in surgery happens in wartime because they have so much so much opportunity. And when he came back, he worked and redesigned how the emergency room should work all over the country.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and well, it was really funny because both sides of my family, all the competition, there were very competitive people on both sides, but it was like, okay, who did the most to save civilization today? Okay, your grandfather did this and your father did that, and so, for example, his father had gotten the laws changed so they could bring penicillin to Tennessee and had introduced penicillin to Tennessee. And that had been a huge lifesaver for many people. Oh. So at the dinner table, it's like your grandfather brought penicillin to Tennessee. What have you done today?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So this idea that you talk about of the control grid.
Right.
Can you explain what the control grid is?
Sure. So let's say the way George Kennan at the end of World War II said we got 6% of the people and 50% of the resources. Mm-hmm. And to keep that going, we're going to have to be really tough. We're going to have to drop a lot of bombs. So Goldwater came along and he said, we're going to have to drop a lot of bombs and be really tough. And people said, no, we're good Christians. We don't want to. That's not us. Mm-hmm. So Jimmy Carter came along and he shivered in front of the fireplace and said, we're going to have to cut back. And the American people said, no, we don't want to do that. So then the Bushes, I always say the Bushes came along and said, you're all good Christians. Here's your check. Don't ask questions. Okay. So what we've been doing is we've been subsidizing the American people with the blessings of sort of racketeering around the world in the third world and running the warfare. So when you go from a unipolar to a multipolar model, you lose the ability to extract the resources you need to keep that going. So, for example, if I want to trade my Danny dollar for, labor and resources all around the world, and the BRICS nations don't want to take the Danny dollar, then I'm losing the ability to subsidize the American way of life. Okay, so I have to cut back. Mm-hmm. So one way to cut back, so you can say, oh, well, there's a climate change emergency. We want everybody to cut back. You can try that. Or you can, throw on tariffs, and that's going to cause even more inflation. Everybody's going to cut back. But at some point, if you're really going to cut people back, it's very helpful if you have complete control. So if you're the bankers and you want to control fiscal policy and collapse the current constitution system, if you can exercise complete control with digital technology and an all-digital financial system, you have complete control. So go back to the pandemic. If we say, okay, we want you and your family to lock down, then suddenly your money won't work outside your house. You can order a pizza to be delivered, but you can't leave the house. If you have an electric car, ultimately you can turn off the electric car. And if they say, well, we want you to take the shot, it's mandated. If you don't take it, we'll turn off your money.
Right.
So you're talking about complete control.
And this would be utilized by spending the government money and giving people money. And and in addition to having a centralized, controlled digital.
This would be used by using the private and the public sector financial train tracks to exercise complete central control. So I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a wonderful video that I keep showing of Augustine Carstens, the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, in 2020. I was brought up, basically, I was trained to be a central banker.
Okay.
And I had never seen a central banker tell the truth in open public in my life until I saw, when this happened, I almost fell off my chair. I was online with John Titus, who does the money market show with me.
Yeah.
And we were chatting as we were watching this IMF panel. And I freaked. I just said, did you see that? He said, don't worry, I got the clip. I said, that's, because in my world, it's impossible. Anyway, but here's what he said, and it's a 59-second video. You can run it if you want. If you go to our website, we have a section called Video Shorts, and in the Financial Transaction Freedom, we have about 100 short videos, and this is the first. He basically said, with digital technology, and he was explaining central bank digital currency, CBDC, but you can do it privately with stablecoins. It doesn't have to be a CBDC. It can be a stablecoin. And he said, we can make the rules of what you can do with your money, and we can enforce the rules of what you can do with your money.
Right.
So if they say, Danny, your health isn't what it should, you can't eat pizza. Your money won't work to buy pizza.
Right. Or you can't travel outside the limits of your area code or your zip code. Your credit cards turn off if you go out there, so you can't buy gas, you can't buy food. Right.
But the reality is, with AI and software, I can make a entirely granular control system just for you, one person at a time. Right. And so I can do it for
not a broad brush. It's very specific.
It's 8 billion, and I can collect all the data and apply my social credit system just to you. If you're good, you'll get, maybe you can travel a little bit more. If you're bad, you get locked down.
But so Trump has been this current administration, this new administration, or at least when Trump was running, he was very pro Bitcoin.
Trump was put in by the bankers to get the control grid. The other team in the Uniparty wasn't moving fast enough. They couldn't get the control grid.
I knew it.
I sent you a link. We just did a new collection of all the things Trump is doing to move the control grid. He is moving very, very fast. When it comes to building, first he's getting the Real ID implemented very aggressively. Real ID, to do a control grid, you need a very high quality precision national ID that's interoperable with all the other IDs around the world. And he's got Kristi Noem out there pushing the Real ID like there's no tomorrow. So they're working, and it's done through the states, but the feds are pushing it. So the first thing you need is a digital ID. The second thing you need is an all-digital financial system. So you got to kill cash, and you got to make everybody interact digitally. And if you look at what he's doing with taxes and Social Security, he's trying to make everybody, he's canceled pennies, but he's also canceled now. Normally I pay my taxes with paper, and now he's saying, no, you got to do everything digital. It's not this year, but the next year.
Really?
So he's trying to, if you go through that list, I've got 50 different items of what he's doing. And if you look at what they're doing with the Genius Act and stablecoin, he said no CBDCs, but stablecoin. So I don't know if you've read the Genius Act, which is the new plan for stablecoins. Okay. A CBDC would be issued by the Federal Reserve, so presumably the New York Fed and the Fed member banks, okay? Now, they are owned by their members. So Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, they own, as members, they own the New York Fed and, basically govern it. Okay. And the New York Fed is the depository for the Treasury, and the different banks work as agent to do those transactions. Okay. So now under the Genius Act, what they're saying is the guys who own the New York Fed are all going to create subsidiaries and issue stablecoin, which will be interoperable and can work with a social credit system. Now, here's the beauty of it. The New York Fed, under the law, has direct obligations to Congress, and Congress has jurisdiction over them. If you do it through the owners of the Fed, through their private subsidiaries, you're going to have some degree of freedom. So it gives you more freedom.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So if you think this is improvement, you have another thing coming. Anyway, but what they're planning to do on stablecoin, which I have to say as a financial matter is quite clever. Remember the pallets of cash you sent to Iraq?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This is going to be the digital equivalent of the pallets of cash sent to Iraq, because what they want to do with stablecoins. So a stablecoin is just a bank deposit or a treasury bill or bond. So it's fully collateralized by $1. Mm-hmm. You put $1 in, and these stablecoins are going to, you have some stablecoins that do gold or other things, but these are going to be $1. Mm-hmm. And this is going to create a huge market for the treasury bills and bonds. And the bank subsidiaries will create the stablecoins, so it'll be fully collateralized in treasury bonds or bills. Mm-hmm. But then you can send them out on Google Payment and Apple Payment and all the wallets around the world. And literally, you can get people from Bolivia to South Korea coming into your state and using stablecoins. So you're literally going to tender for the global population, try and get everybody off of their local currency into stable coins, and you're going to pump out massive amounts of private credit to make it really attractive. So you're just going to hand out money and get everybody on the dollar.
And you don't think the BRICS would try to compete with this?
Of course.
They would, right?
Yeah, of course.
And do you think this is something that could legitimately be implemented? And if so, how soon do you think they would start doing this?
I think as soon as you pass the Genius Act, it can go very, very fast.
And where are we at right now with the Genius Act and it getting passed?
I'm assuming it's going to pass sometime soon. If it doesn't pass before the session breaks, it'll pass in the fall, is my guess. So it could, you could really see the world rock. Now, our problem in America...
Is Trump aware of all this stuff? Or what do you think? What is his motive in all of this? Or not his motive, but is he basically a useful idiot here?
So I don't know Trump. Yeah. I lived in New York for 11 years, and the PR firm we use did his business too. Everything I know about Trump, I know from Howard Rubenstein and company. Wow. Anyway, but I think Trump is in a box, and all I see, I have to judge people by what they're doing, and what it looks to me like Trump and Musk are implementing the control grid at high speed. And don't believe me, go look at that list, because what you have to say is, okay, to do a control grid, we need a digital ID implemented that's very high quality, high precise. Check the box. We need an all-digital financial system. Check the box. We need a way of doing interoperable money. Check the box. If you look at what Doge is doing, we need a social credit system. Check the box.
Wait, what do you mean by that? What Doge is doing?
Doge is, from what it looks like to me, and I'm basing my assessment of what I know from Doge includes... I read the Financial Times, I need to read the Wall Street Journal, and I need to read Wired. Wired has done a very thorough job of trying to document what's happening in the systems. Mm-hmm. And I think basically what they've done is they've taken... So if I wanted to stop fraud in the U.S. government, I would say there's 20 trillion missing from DOD, there's $1 trillion missing from HUD. I'm going to go in, figure out where it went, get it back.
Right.
That's not what they did. If you said to me, I want to build a social credit system that can be used to enforce control against the American people and basically lock them down with both enforcement and social credit, I would go get the Social Security data, the IRS data, and the Treasury payment data, and that's exactly what they did. and I would privatize it. I would just take it and put it in private AI with XAI and Palantir AI. And if Palantir still has the contracts with Treasury and the IRS to enforce, you got everybody. And you add the Kennedy's aggregating the healthcare data, you put it with the healthcare data. Now Danny, they've been aggregating this kind of data. I used to call it the data beast. So they've been aggregating this kind of powerful data since the 90s. So I don't think this is all new. So, for example,
IRS data, healthcare data, and combining it all together into one system combined with AI.
Right. But I think this time the federal government has generally done a pretty good job of siloing the data to protect privacy laws for many applications. But I think this unsilos everything and moves it private and puts it on an out-of-control basis is my guess as to what's probably happened. Now, this is conjecture, remember, but if I wanted to build a control grid, that's exactly what I would do.
And then the day before 9/11, Rumsfeld says that we have, what was it, like $4 trillion that were just unaccounted for?
They were missing, DOD was missing $4 trillion, but he said 2.3.
He said it was 2.3.
But it was 4. And I was working with a reporter, and we had a huge story coming out that Friday about the whole missing money and what it meant per person. So we had calculated for each taxpayer in each state how much you were missing. So, yeah. So that was the financial coup, which had started in 1998.
And where did all that money go?
Well, that's what I've been trying to figure out. And without the bank statements, I can't, so I've tried to map out, because money, remember, you're too young to remember, did you ever see the old Pillsbury Doughboy commercials where they squeeze down on one and it pops out someplace else?
Oh, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, so you're probably too young. So when the money started to going missing from the Treasury and the federal government, the offshore havens started to just balloon, So this is going down and this is going up. And anyway, but I have tried to unpack where the money's gone and what they've been spending it on. And I have a lot of guesses. But
what's your best guess?
I think it's many different things. The first thing, I think you've been financing a new system. So I call it the breakaway civilization. But I think you've literally been financing a new system. And it's like when you're running a company and you keep the old systems going and you get the new systems up and you bring the resources over steadily. And then at some point you're ready to bring this down. And I used to say the pandemic was the breakaways breaking back in and taking over. But I think they've moved a lot of money out. And in theory, if you look at how much has been stolen, it's enough to run a global government on an endowment basis. It is.
How much roughly total has been stolen?
So as of 2015, there was 21 trillion in undocumentable adjustments, but that's not cash. And it could reflect money coming in. So you could be bringing money in from the war zone. So how much is net missing? It's impossible to tell. But given everything, I would be amazed if it wasn't at least that much missing. So now, what I think you've been doing is you've been making enormous investments in black budget technology and infrastructure. So, so I think you've got a huge physical infrastructure. Some of it, when you did 9/11, you were able to move a lot more black budget on budget. And so that sort of eased the pain, because the problem with the black budget as of 9/11 was to get that money, you had to tell, the fraud had gotten so dysfunctional and wasteful. So you wanted to do more on budget. But, whether it's building a new governance system and a new endowment to run it, or invisible weaponry, secret space program, the infrastructure underground to platform that, I think it's all those things.
One of the theories that has been bouncing around in my head from recent guests that I've had on is that military contractors have been taking money from the U.S. government and from the Pentagon to develop futuristic weaponry, develop new physics alternative propulsion
Absolutely. Absolutely.
crafts that have some sort of alternative propulsion
absolutely.
systems since the 70s, or even actually probably since the 50s, I think.
Here's how it works. Okay. 47. Do you understand the legal structure of how they did it?
No.
Okay. 47, you passed the National Security Act. Okay. And that gives you the ability to set up the secret infrastructure. 49, you passed the CIA Act. They literally had to kill the Secretary of Defense to do that. They assassinated Forrestal to get that done. We have a lot of interesting material on the Forrestal assassination on the Solarian. You should go
Really?
through. Yeah, you should learn about Forrestal and what caused that assassination and what it did to create. You literally took several sections.
Wasn't he a KKK guy?
Don't.
Okay.
Not that I know of. He was the president of Dillon Reed. He was a
Right.
partner of Dillon Reed.
Okay.
Okay.
I thought he was in the KKK for some reason. I might be thinking of someone else. Never mind.
I don't know. I've never
Okay.
read that about Forrestal. I really studied him, but I don't know.
Okay.
So,
Don't worry about it, Steve.
well, even if he was, that's not
Okay.
what got him killed. What got him
Right.
killed was standing in the way of creating Israel and giving them the nuclear bomb.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he wanted disclosure on the black budget. He was for disclosure on the black budget, and he didn't want Israel. He didn't want that part of the organized crime syndicate to get sovereign powers. Anyway, what happened was they made a deal on the 49. They got rid of Forrestal. They made a deal on the 49 Act. That created the CIA.
Okay.
And that made the CIA the most powerful banker in the world. Eisenhower put him in charge of Area 51 security. And literally, once you look at how the Exchange Stabilization Fund and sort of the different money aspects of the 47 and 49 Act organized to work, you've now created this financial mechanism that combines covert violence and makes it the most powerful banker in the world. I should say, on the covert side, the most powerful bank in the world is BIS.
Didn't they use? I could be wrong about this, but didn't Dulles take a bunch of money from the budget to rebuild Europe after World War II to build
Yes.
Area 51? That's what
I don't know if he used that to build Area 51. He ran a slush fund out of the Exchange Stabilization Fund from Sullivan Cromwell and before they
Right.
got the 49 Act created. And part of that was to create this infrastructure, because part of it said you can appropriate to all the different agencies and then claw it out secretly to give it to the intelligence
Right,
agencies.
right.
So they created, after World War II and all the slush fund money they got from World War II, they created a mechanism to constantly replenish the covert money. But here's the big thing. When Bush came in during the Reagan years as vice president, his deal with the intelligence agencies was he gets to run, or with Reagan, was he gets to run the National Security Council and the intelligence agencies. He creates an executive order signed by the president, by Reagan, that corporations can do highly classified work. Now, let me tell you what that means. What that means is the Treasury can issue an infinite number of bonds and use that money to pay corporations to do highly secret things, including just gifting them all of the black technology funded by the taxpayers and moving it onto their balance sheet, and do it in a secret way that generates enormous profits in the stock market.
Wow.
Okay? So now you've got a way. Now, what's the number one source of campaign contributions?
Companies like this.
Capital gains.
Capital gains. Okay.
Capital gains. I have a stock. It's trading at a multiple of 20. I give you $1 million a year contract. That goes up by $20 million. Your stock goes up. That creates capital gains for the investors and the executives, who then turn around and they or their law firms make political contributions. It's a kickback system.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand.
So if you read my book, I have an online book called Dillon Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, and it was designed to explain to you how that kickback system works.
Right.
Because, and the quote we have at the beginning is an old New Jersey street saying, make a law, make a business. So every time the government does something that makes stocks go up, they get a kickback of campaign contributions
Right.
from that.
Right.
And of course, the taxpayers funding the whole thing. Now, let's go back to corporations. Now I can transfer trillions of dollars of invaluable black technology into the corporations and fund them with taxpayers' money to own and develop it secretly and keep it away from FOIA. So you and I can put in a FOIA and we can't find out because it's behind the corporate veil.
Right. Now, one of the fears about this is that allegedly since the 50s when they started working on some of this stuff, is that it's gotten so advanced in these black corporate or these black military industrial complex, aerospace corporations, whatever you want to call them, that they've become essentially more powerful than the U.S. military because of the technology that they have power up, they own.
Now, I can't say that it's more powerful than the U.S. military because they need the U.S. military to do a lot of what they're doing.
Well, essentially the way it was described to me is that these corporations or these organizations basically are so powerful and have such advanced technology that they have their own Air Force, their own their own Navy, everything.
And we've had senators stand up and say this, but what I call them is a breakaway civilization.
Right.
They have broken away and they are so much more advanced. Now, if you look at their assets, what I would say, if I could assert jurisdiction, those are our assets. Those were either gifted or stolen. They belong to us.
Right.
But it's not corporations who have a lot of technology. It is a breakaway civilization. And they literally think of themselves as a separate civilization and not subject to our laws.
Separate from not only the United States, but separate from the world, from all nations.
Separate from the human race.
Separate from the human race. I'm curious about Joseph Farrell. And what you know about him, your connection to him.
So I've worked with him for years. We're very close.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How did you guys meet? Are you back up, Steve?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay.
So I met Joseph by reading his books. I started reading his books, and I just concluded he was a great scholar. It never occurred to me that I could get to know him. And then I met him, and we started to work together. And every quarter we do a 5 to 10 hour recording called News, Trends, and Stories. It's basically going through what happened over the last quarter of the last year. We do 4 a year. And we look at everything that's going on a very integrated basis. So we go through we'll define the top 10 to 15 stories, and then we go through something called unanswered questions. And we're both great believers in framing questions. If you don't have the intelligence you need to know for sure what's going on, you can still define questions and use those questions to learn more and more and more and get to the point where you know more. So, and we have a section called unanswered questions and then one called inspiration. And we spend we just finished a 10-hour recording.
Really?
The number one story was 3 hours. It was the first 70 days.
So my understanding, for people who don't know who he is, my shallow understanding of Joseph, his background is he's published 10 books on how there is this breakaway civilization of Nazi origin.
So Joseph, the thing you have to understand about Joseph is a great scholar. He is a scholar. He has his PhD from Oxford. He studied patristics and ancient Christian theology, and he intended to have a very serious academic career. And he proceeded into academia after having his doctorate. He grew up in South Dakota and walked smack into the fact that the American academic institutions were all not interested in serious scholarship and were headed the wrong way. And he literally ended up at one point working in a casino as a dealer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, trying to support himself. So then he just started writing books about, sort of what's going on. And he focused on, so again, we've been talking about the breakaway civilization. Who's really wanting things and why are they doing what? And he'll go way back in history. He'll go back 1,000, 2,000 years. The Venetians, how have the Venetians and the Venetian model rolled into the central banking model, or how did the Nazis roll into the breakaway civilization? He does a lot on the secret space program, and he's absolutely brilliant. And what happened to me was I was an investment advisor, and Joseph was the only. When I tried to explain to the people who were doing shows related to the stock market and the financial system, they couldn't incorporate the black budget. And the covert side of the economy was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you couldn't explain what was happening in the financial system by using the official reality. And so what I discovered is, even though Joseph's expertise is patristics and theology and ancient history and all these other things, he was better on the financial system than the financial guys because he could integrate all the information related to the secret governance system and science. He's very good on science. And so he and I worked more and more closely together. And he's had a very profound impact on me because one of the things he taught me was we can't save the government necessarily, but we can save the culture. And when he said that, I had no idea, Danny, what that meant. It's like, I'm an investment banker. How do you save a culture?
Right,
I don't know what to do. And he really got me to understand the power of each one of us. I knew about this financially, but each one of us in our personal lives, building the culture that we want to live in and doing it with all of our time and money. And anyway, so we've collaborated both on the cultural issues as well as the geopolitics and news. And I don't know any person. So he was also worried, as I was, about the plunder we're seeing in the government. And we've always known, as these guys plundered all around the world, that they've said they were going to come back and plunder North America. So he just published a book on Reconstruction after the Civil War, because he wanted to warn people, this is what plunder looks like. Okay. So anyway, but he's absolutely brilliant. And if you look at the content that you've covered on your podcast, there's no topic that you've talked about that he's not.
Right.
Has something, he has something fascinating to say about anything. The other thing I did with Joseph that was just a blast, and remember, we're constantly in cahoots, is I Solari crowdfunded a digital organ for him.
A digital organ?
I was at his house one day and I said, Joseph, you're not yourself. And he said, I just dealing with the content we deal with, it's depressing. And I said, well, what do you do for fun? He said, I love to play the organ. He plays the organ. And I said, well, why don't you go play the organ? And he said, I can't because all the churches, the insurance companies won't let other people use it now. So the churches won't let me play their organs. And I said, well, how much does it cost to buy an organ? And he said, well, you can get a digital organ. And I said, okay, well, we're going to do a crowdfund for a digital organ. And it was during the campaign in 2016. And literally there were about 200 people in the Solari network who crowdfunded a digital organ for Joseph. And it was like a whole process. We went through 3 phases. We had luncheons and meetings, and it became like a little cult. You know what I mean? It's like, you guys have an election, we're going to crowdfund and learn all about organ music.
That's
and it
so
was, so now I listen to a lot of organ music, and I travel around Europe going to great organ concerts. So I'm really into it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it is great. It's really, if you've ever been in a beautiful cathedral with organ music, it's like an electromagnetic healing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really amazing.
I bet. I've never experienced it, but I can imagine.
Oh, you have to take your whole family, go to Chartres, go to Mont Saint Michel when there's a great organ concert.
Isn't he like a Orthodox priest or something?
He's Russian Orthodox.
He's Russian Orthodox.
And he's very devout. And he very, he takes his theology seriously. So I'm always getting yelled at because I'm Christian, but I'm not Russian Orthodox.
Yeah. That's interesting. So he ultimately has been writing about these breakaway civilizations forever.
Years. Yeah.
For years.
Years. Yeah. And he's been on it from the beginning.
Yeah. And his theory that these are somehow, they come from the Nazis or something like this.
So take it back to, about Admiral Byrd after World War II.
Remind me.
Okay. So Admiral Byrd took a force of a naval force down to Antarctica.
Oh, okay.
And
Is this Operation High Jump?
Yes.
Okay.
And came back very quickly, having lost, I think, ships and men or something. But whatever happened down there, we got whooped. And so the question has been since then, because the Nazis were clearly down there, during World War II. But, and the Nazis never, if you look at the surrender, according to Joseph, the Nazis never surrendered. The German government surrendered, but the Nazis never surrendered. And we know Dulles was in Switzerland the whole time laundering money back and forth.
Right.
And the rat lines got a lot of money out. And so, and we brought 4,000 plus scientists, Nazi scientists, into the national security state.
Well, some people, or a guy who's been on the show before, he's a philosopher and a historian on this stuff, Jason Giorgiani, was explaining to me how essentially Dulles and the national security state funded the Nazis.
Yeah. So there's a wonderful book, I don't know if you've read it, Charles Higham, Trading with the Enemies. And he literally describes people stopping, ball-bearing orders going to the U.S. military so that they could go to Germany to keep the tanks going. So you literally had a metastructure, whether it's Dulles in Switzerland moving money back and forth, or literally the American industrial establishment helping keep the German tanks going. So, you literally had a whole corporate infrastructure that was on both sides of the fight.
So I'm curious. So this breakaway civilization that we've been talking about of bankers, central bankers, and private military contractors, what is there some sort of cohesive ideology that they entertain?
Not that I know of. So, and I think that is one of the reasons I think they're going to fail, because they don't, I have seen in different sections or spots a culture or a theology or a philosophy, but I've never seen in the overarching. And now what you've seen groups, you see some groups who are just, it's just mafia, it's just crime. So, I would say culturally, the reason the unipolar model failed was the culture failed.
For the United States.
For the United States. But if you look at what the groups who seem to have power positions globally, I think their culture will fail.
Is there, when it comes to, again, going back to this idea of this breakaway civilization, some of the stuff that Farrell has talked about, is there, what is, they have ideas about genealogy and eugenics, and a lot of them are eugenicists and believe in this idea of this master race.
So I can only tell you what I personally experienced, but they do believe in bloodlines, and the notion of bloodlines is very serious and real. And they do believe, just like they believe in breeding racehorses or champion cattle, they do believe that some people are genetically superior to other people.
Right.
And that's part of the bloodlines. And I don't know a lot about, I only know what I've experienced, but I don't know a lot about it. What I do know is, one of the big unanswered questions I have is how much have they been doing genetic engineering of children all along? So, and I suspect they probably have been. So you saw the movie Hannah, right?
I don't think so.
Oh, see the movie Hannah. It's all in the movies,
Okay.
It's I remember in America, fact is fiction, fiction.
Well,
is
you've seen.
fact.
I know you talked about the novel, the science fiction novel, Three Body Problem. I heard you talk about that.
Right.
Which is basically the idea of this alien civilization coming here from another star system that has like 3 suns and they can't survive, and somebody contacted them somehow and like let them know that we have a planet here and they're on their way here and they're trying to stifle all scientific innovation on planet Earth. And so so by the time they get here in like 450 years, we can't develop technologically to be able to fight them off.
Right. So one of the things I believe, have you ever read Rings of Saturn?
No.
Nora Berglund. Oh, that's a book you should read. I can send it to you.
Okay.
It's when I first tried to buy it was $2,000, so somebody sent it to me in
Holy
PDF.
crap.
No, I think if you can't get it, I'll send you the PDF.
Yeah.
But Berglund was, I think he was at I can't remember I think it was NASA. He was an engineer. And when Voyager passed Saturn in 1980, they call it the thing in the ring. They saw what they thought was like a 70-mile-long plasma spaceship docked in the rings, and the theory was that it was getting energy from the ring. And that's when the mortgage fraud and the financial fraud exploded. And one of my hypotheses is, did they suddenly say we need as much money as possible to come up to that level of civilization? Because the theory, sort of the history of a more technologically advanced civilization, meaning a less, so it never works out well for the less.
Yeah.
So it's the same in three-buddy problem. Crash course, how do we get up here? And one theory on the breakaways is, okay, that's a crash course to get us up to deal with the people who control the thing in the ring. I don't know if it's true, but if you read Popular Mechanics, they say the camera on Voyager magically shut down and, it's complete. Anyway,
Yeah.
But if you read Rings of Saturn, it's very...
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And you believe that that we have some sort of alternative source of free energy that we've already figured out, or that somebody's already figured out, and they're keeping it secret from the world.
We have a subsidiary in the Netherlands, Solar Europa. So I have a Dutch partner, and it's 50-50, myself and my Dutch partner. And that group, they do all our audio videos, extraordinary people. I met them because from 2010 to now, they've been doing conferences on breakthrough energy in the secret space program. And their breakthrough energy group is called Global BEM. It's up on the internet. You can see all their presentations. But
Global who?
BEM, B-E-M,
Okay.
Breakthrough Energy Movement
Okay,
is
got
what
it.
it stands for. And, they have a website and they publish all this stuff. And I participated in some of the conferences. But they've been gathering breakthrough energy inventors from all over the world regularly to talk about what's possible. I have two companies. One is Solari Report and the other is Solari Screens. I do an investment screen. And the money manager, one of the money managers we work with on Solari Screens, we have a fund. And he's been an investor for many, many years in a breakthrough energy company. So, and occasionally I'll talk to him about it. Now, I'm one of those people, science goes in one ear and out the other. So
Yeah.
you don't want to ask me about breakthrough energy, but, it's all available up on the internet. And if you know the story of Tesla, on down to the current, there's lots of documentation and evidence that we have a lot of low-cost forms of energy available.
Well, that's the crazy sort of paradox with the idea of, if they're building these, which we know they're building these, giant underground cities and military bases and, underground superhighways for people for some sort of government to be able to run, and for these people to survive in some sort of nuclear war event or something like this, that, eventually the diesel power that they're using to run those is going to run out of gas or run out of fuel somehow, and they're not going to be able to power those underground bases.
I have no idea how they're powering it, but it seems to me, they're doing it, whether it's nuclear energy or breakthrough energy. And also, if you look at the people, what they've said, once you can get solar farms up in the suborbital platform and shoot the energy down here. There's also all sorts of ideas about how if you can dramatically lower the cost of energy, that would make you want to have complete control. If you're running the planet, you would want to have complete control, because if everybody gets breakthrough energy on an out-of-control basis, you've got no way to control them. Farrell and I did a great 2-hour interview called Who is Mr. Global? And we went through every different hypotheses.
What do you mean? Can you define Mr. Global?
It's the committee that runs the world. So
Okay.
There's a committee at the top that makes all the big decisions. And my nickname for it is Mr. Global. So the question is, who is Mr. Global, and why is Mr. Global doing what he's doing? Because when I look at a situation, I like to put myself in somebody else's shoes. Like, if I was Danny and I was doing this, what would it look like from my point of view? And so I want to put myself in why is Mr. Global doing this? What's Mr. Global's point of view? So anyway, Joseph and I went through and did Who is Mr. Global and why is he doing what he's doing? So we went through all the theories, but some of my favorite comments on the internet is they'll say, well, she worked at the White House and she knows, so she's not telling us. It's like, no, everybody at the White House is not sure.
Who's your best guess of who Mr. Global is?
I think you have intergenerational pools of capital, and right now they are over influenced by occult.
Occult.
Yes, so I think you have interdimensional intelligence, which is operating demonic intelligence.
Interdimensional
Intelligence.
demonic intelligence.
Yeah. Yep. So I think this thing about good and evil is real, and they're I can't find it anymore. I found it once. There were in the 30s, a British physicist got up and said, we are being manipulated, but from other dimensions by intelligent beings from other dimensions. So I think, if you study Christianity and you read the Bible, you're dealing with both divine intelligence and demonic intelligence. And I think too much of the leadership has gotten deeply involved in the occult and demonic kinds of intelligence.
Wow.
So I just read a book, and I have no idea. So I've tried to find every theory to explain the paranormal stuff. So I'm not telling you this is true, but I just finished reading a book called Final Event by Nick Redfern. I don't know if you've ever read it. Mm-mm. And he describes it's a exploration of a group of military intelligence in the United States called the Collins Elite.
Oh yeah, I've heard about the Collins Elite. Yeah.
And they came to believe that the ET phenomena was a demonic phenomena. It was not people from another planet. It was demonic intelligence.
It was biblical stuff.
Right. And one of the things he discovered was that, or the Collins Elite apparently discovered, is in many sort of ET abduction events, if you called on Jesus Christ, it would stop.
What?
Yeah. That's what he reported. And he strikes me, I don't know anything about him, but it struck me as someone who was trying to do a faithful job of simply reporting what they found.
There's a lot of folks in the intelligence community that publicly state how they believe that the whole UFO phenomena is like this biblical thing. How it's angels and demons, and these things can be angelic entities, and like literal, like ground, like legitimate people in the intelligence community, whether they're still active or retired or whatever, that have been on podcasts that state they believe this.
So I am sure that all of that stuff is happening. So I think we are dealing with demonic and angelic forces in our world, and that's interdimensional intelligence. So the Bible calls it, demons and angels. Other people call it fifth dimension or whatever. Yeah. But I think we're absolutely, and I will tell you what I think is the most important thing to understand about the universe. So write this down. This is my favorite. Mm-hmm. My favorite new book is A New Science of Heaven by Robert Temple.
Oh yeah.
99% of the material in the universe is plasma. Our universe is made up of plasma. And I used to hear that David Bohm said this, and other physicists as well, but Temple's really documented and nailed it. And I'm sure he's right. Plasma is alive and it's intelligent. And that means life is alive and intelligent.
Plasma or dark matter?
Plasma.
Plasma.
But, let me make it simple. The universe is alive and intelligent.
Sure.
And we share intelligence with all life. So in The Lord of the Rings, when the trees show up to help, that's real.
Right.
So life is alive. And the notion that you can take digital technology and control it centrally, once you understand that, is so ridiculous. Only a demonic intelligence would come up with that plan.
Huh.
Right?
Have you noticed this recent phenomena of, and there's been articles written about it, of essentially a lot of big shots in Silicon Valley are mapping Christianity now onto everything that's going on in Silicon Valley. There's a new church in Silicon Valley that everyone's going to. Peter Thiel and the head of this company called Y Combinator are, Peter Thiel is a famous billionaire gay Christian, and the guy from Y Combinator is a big devout Christian, and they're holding these big conferences, and all all these folks in Silicon Valley seem to be now converting to Christianity, going to church, and it's just really interesting to me, because Silicon Valley is, historically known for being like anti-religion, right? Like it's not been a typical religious part of the world in history. These people are, a lot of people developing tech and developing, these social media platforms, transhumanism, and
I know nothing about it.
Yeah. There's been a lot of articles. There was an article in the New York Times that came out, I think the New Yorker. And it's really interesting to me that somebody like Peter Thiel would be somebody who's, very much tied up in the military industrial complex, the intelligence community.
I would say that there is a non-alignment between the teachings of Jesus Christ and what Peter Thiel and his companies are doing.
Yeah.
So,
but it makes me wonder though, why somebody like Peter Thiel would be so invested in promoting Christianity in Silicon Valley.
I don't know. I would need to understand a lot more.
I wonder if it has something to do with trying to bolster Christianity in the United States, or sort of revive Christianity in some sort of a national security aspect.
Well, here's the problem. The problem is that there has been so much financial fraud and corruption that you have a real breakdown in productivity in the general population. And so, there is a vested interest, if you don't want to depopulate everybody, in getting everybody to be productive. And they're not going to be productive unless they believe in morals and have morals. So, our problem, the reason the unipolar model failed, in my opinion, is we're not agreement capable. And the leadership is not agreement capable, but now the message is the population, you don't need to be agreement capable. Mm-hmm. And when a complex society depends on the rule of law, or at least the appearance of the rule of law, you take away the ability to be agreement capable, and the society fails.